Bathroom Breaks and Bedtime Tales presents The Woman in the Red Coat by Sevastian Winters.
Allied Military Tribunal, October 1950.
The courtroom was silent, except for the faint shuffling of papers and the occasional cough. I stood when they called my name, the chains on my wrists clinking faintly as I rose.
This was no grand tribunal. The trials of men like Goering and Hess were long over. It had taken the tribunals nearly 6 years to get to me, every one of them spent as a prisoner. As Nazi officers went, while I was not insignificant, neither was my case pressing. My name would never be etched into the history books, and there were no reporters in this room. But judgment is judgment, and after a short trial wherein I pled guilty, this was mine. Only the sentencing was left. The presiding officer, an American colonel with a sick neck and an impatient manner, leaned forward. Hauptsturmführer Ernst Vogt, you're charged with facilitating crimes against humanity in Berlin, 1943. Specifically, your role in the detention and deportation of Jewish men married to Aryan women from Rosenstrasse. Do you have anything to say before we render our sentence?
I hesitated. For months I had considered what I would say at this moment. I could plead ignorance, blame my superiors, and insist I was only following orders, but the weight of that lie felt heavier than the chains on my wrists.
"Yes," I said, my voice steady despite the dryness in my throat. "But I will not speak in my defense. I have precious little. I wish instead to tell you about the bravest woman I ever met."
I met her at Rosenstrasse, Berlin in 1943, I began. It was winter, and Berlin was locked in a frost that seemed to seep into your bones. The war had turned the city into a grey, brittle shell of itself. I was the commandant of the detention center on Rosenstrasse, tasked with overseeing the Jewish men arrested in the latest action.
These men were what the Reich called privileged Jews. They were married to Aryan women, and their marriages had shielded them for years. But by 1943, the Reich had grown impatient. Exceptions were no longer tolerated.
At first it was like any other action, efficient, systematic, soulless. My orders came from above, and I carried them out without question. I thought little of the men I saw in the cells. They were numbers, names on a list. I told myself it was easier that way.
Then the women came.
It started with just a few dozen of them, then a few hundred. They stood outside the detention center, bundled in thin coats against the cold, holding signs with crude, uneven letters, demanding justice. Their voices carried through the streets as they chanted, "Give us back our husbands!"
I watched from my office window, expecting them to leave after a few hours, but they didn't. By the second day, their numbers had grown. By the third, there were hundreds. Their voices rose like a tide, louder and louder, until it felt like the sound was coming from inside the walls. Something about their defiance unsettled me. I had seen resistance before, but this was different. These were not soldiers or agitators. They were mothers and wives, standing in the snow, risking everything for the men they loved. That's when I noticed her, Anna Weber. While everyone else wore shades of gray and brown and black, she wore a red wool coat and painted her eyes and lips. Other women seemed to gather around her. Other than the red coat and makeup in an occupied zone, she was fairly unremarkable. Besides being no particular beauty, I suspected her to be in her late 40s, small in stature, almost frail-looking, with a face pale from exhaustion. But there was a fire in her eyes that set her apart from the others. She didn't hold a sign, she didn't shout, she just stood there, watching the building as if she could see through the walls.
I sent for her that evening. I told myself it was a tactical decision, that breaking their leader would break the protest. But when she walked into my office, I realized she wasn't what I expected.
"You are?" I asked.
"Anna Weber." Her voice was soft but steady. "I'm here for my husband, Heinrich Weber."
I studied her for a moment.
"Frau Weber," I asked, "why is it that you wear red while all the other women wear drab?"
I told you, she said without malice. I'm here for my husband. I smiled. And you believe makeup and a pretty coat will create sympathy for you? I asked. Anger flashed across her face momentarily, and she replied, You misunderstand me. I am not here for you or for your men. I am here for my husband. You dress like this for him? I asked. Yes. I studied her for a long moment. Do you understand that this protest of yours is futile? That the Reich does not bow to the demands of women shouting in the streets? Do you understand, she said, meeting my gaze, that I will not leave without my husband? Her words shook me, not because of what she said, but because of the way she said it. Calm, unshaken, as if her resolve was something I could not touch. I told her to leave. She didn't argue, but as she turned to go, she said something I will never forget. If you think you can frighten me, Herr Vogt, you are mistaken. You already have everything I care about. The protest grew larger every day. By the 5th day, there were well over 1,000 women standing in the street, perhaps even twice that, their voices hoarse but unrelenting. My officers came to me, nervous and uncertain. Should we disperse them by force? One of them asked. No, I said, we will not create martyrs. But I knew the situation could not continue. My superiors were demanding action, and the women would not leave. I summoned Anna Weber to my office once again. She looked thinner than before, her cheeks hollow from the cold. Frau Weber, I said, you have left me no choice. This protest must end, and so I will make you an offer. She stared at me, her hands clenched at her sides. I will release one man, I said, your husband, but if I do, the others will remain. Or I will release them all, and your husband will stay behind. The choice is yours. For the first time, I saw her falter. Her lips parted, but no words came. Tears filled her eyes, but she did not let them fall. She stood there, trembling, as the weight of my words crushed her. Finally she spoke. Release them all, she said. Her voice was barely above a whisper, but it was firm. Release them all. You understand, Frau Weber, that I will ship your husband to Auschwitz on the weekend. Tears formed in the corners of her eyes, and she gritted her teeth. For a moment, I thought I might at last break her. She spoke again, her voice controlled but angry.
I made my choice, Herr Vogt. Now, will you do as you promised?
I did not answer. I dismissed her without another word. I could not bear to look at her.
One of my men led her back outside.
I kept my promise, as much for the sake of maintaining the peace as for my promise to Anna Weber. The next morning, the gates of the detention center opened. The men stumbled out into the daylight, their faces gaunt and their bodies frail. But they were alive.
I watched from my office as the women rushed forward, their cries filling the air. The sound was deafening, overwhelming.
But Anna Weber did not move. She stood apart from the others, her arms wrapped tightly around herself. As promised, her husband was not among the men.
That afternoon, the street was empty for the first time in days. The other women had gone home with their husbands, but Anna still remained. She stood there, alone in the snow, staring at the gates.
Night fell without a change.
Finally, I could take no more. I left my office, pistol drawn. I walked down the hall, down the stairs, and out the front door, lifted my pistol to her head, and nearly spit my words at her. What is the meaning of this?
She did not flinch. She did not plea. Her eyes stared back at me with neither fear nor malice. I told you, Herr Vogt, I am here for my husband.
Impossible, I said. We made a deal.
No, Herr Vogt, you made a deal. I told you I would not leave without my husband.
I gestured around wildly. You have no supporters. I could kill you now, and no one would know you existed.
You could, she agreed, but that is not the nature of the power you want.
I holstered my pistol, keeping the safety at the ready in case I changed my mind. What's that supposed to mean?
You already know, she said. The moment you enact your vengeance, your power over me is over.
But you will be dead, I replied.
She smiled for the first time. It was an awkward smile. It reeked of pity. Yes, but you will not have created my compliance. You want a clear lawn and a clear conscience, she replied, and that will haunt you for the rest of your days.
I could just kill your husband, I replied.
You could, but then you would never have my gratitude or my compliance. I made my decision to give her neither satisfaction. Without another word, I turned to walk away. The next morning she was still there, red coat mocking me, mocking my lack of power, despite my power over everything she held dear, even her own life.
Every time I looked out from the window, she stood the same as she had when I'd last seen her. By noon I could not look at her without feeling the full weight of her presence, her husband's presence. At last I could take her torment no more.
I sent for Heinrich Weber and released him to her. I watched from my window as they embraced, as he held out his arm for her, as she took it, and together they strode arm in arm from my headquarters, down the street, to their home, and out of my life forever.
I stopped speaking, my voice trembling with the memory. The room was silent, the weight of my story hanging in the air. The presiding officer leaned forward. Why did you release him, Herr Vogt?
I met his gaze, my voice steady. Because she stayed, she gave everything, her voice, her strength, her hope, to save those men. And even when she thought she had lost everything,
She stood her ground. Quietly and without malice, she taught me the true meaning of power, and how little I held, despite the enormity of my station.
I could not let that sacrifice go unanswered. Thank you for letting me tell you her story.
The room remained silent as I sat down, the chains on my wrists rattling faintly. Soon I expected to be hanged, or at the very least sent to rot in a prison cell, as I knew by then I deserved.
The officer gestured to a bailiff who stepped forward, produced his keys, and reached for my wrists. Tears fell from my face as he unlocked me.
This tribunal sentences you to time served. You're free to go, Herr Vogt, said the officer with an unexpected smile. Tears rushed from my face. Family members who had come to see me sentenced erupted with joy.
Then the gavel-banging brought the proceedings back to order. The colonel spoke again.
By the way, Herr Vogt, I thought you might be surprised to know I wasn't always an American. Indeed, I am from Rosenstrasse. He paused. I could see on his face that he was close to tears. I barely noticed, as I still had tears rushing down my own face from the realization I was free and would soon be going home. The room seemed to spin in slow motion, but I will never forget what he said next.
Thank you for sparing my sister Anna and her husband, he said. She sends her warm regards.